G-Man Boxing. Do you know what I mean? Every single live he donates. I see him on other lives donating. He's got the bag on it.
Alright people, midweek report time. There's been a good bit of news breaking over the last few days. I'm going to steal a saying from Thomas Sheridan. I'm going to say at the start of this video. It's going to be a long one, so put on the kettle. That's a good one. Let's get started with this. Where we start? We start with the Fury Whyte undercard. Well, as I expected, they announced the undercard, and as expected, it's nothing to really write home about. You've Anthony Casitas versus a guy called Jonathan Romero. Now Casitas, he's a Belfast fighter. He beat Leon Woodstock some stage last year. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it might have been just before summer last year, maybe just after. But he beat Leon Woods. In fact, I actually think it was after. I think there was fans in attendance. And, you know, he's had a bit of a stop-start career. He's fighting a guy, Jonathan Romero. I have to admit, I've never, ever heard of him. On the undercard as well, we have Isaac Lowe. Now, I already knew he was on the undercard because it was already announced. Well, it wasn't announced, but it was on BoxRec. And he's fighting a guy called Nick Ball. Now, I've heard he's undefeated. Yeah, he is. He's 14-0 now. I'm going to be honest, I haven't heard much of Nick Ball. He's 25 years old, 14-0 with 7 knockouts. Why does that name ring a bell? I think I have seen him actually fight before, because he did fight on Lyndon Arter versus Dex Spellman. Jesus, that's a while ago. That was the first. I think that was actually the first show, or one of the first shows in the UK when everything opened up. So that's a while ago. So I think I remember seeing him there. Can't say it really stuck with me, if you know what I mean, in terms of his performance. It wasn't like I seen it and I was like, got to keep an eye on this guy. He knocked out Joe Ducker in 2 rounds. That's the guy Campbell Hatton beat, so he obviously got rid of him quicker. Jamie Quinn. He's not fought anybody really, just journeyman. So this will be a step up for him anyway. And he's a Frank Warren fighter as well. He's been fighting, well, certainly judging by his box record, a lot of his fights been on Queensbury. So he's fighting Isaac Lowe. Isaac Lowe, I've never really rated Isaac Lowe. I think he's been very lucky in a couple of fights to get away with draws. At the end of the day, he's got 1 loss and 3 draws. I think one of the draws was from a clash of heads early on in one of his fights. I think it was against Ryan Walsh. I think it was against him anyway. But there's other fights he's had where I felt he was very lucky to get away with just the draw. And Isaac Lowe I think he's best friends with Tyson Fury, so he's always on his undercards. David Adelaide versus Chris Healy. Again, that's more a little bit of a step up for Adelaide. There is other names as well on this card as well, but Chris Healy, 9-8. He's not particularly good. You know, if you look at his resume, he fought in that in Boxer, Ultimate Boxer, when it was called back then, and only lost out to Nick Webb. Lost out to him on a split decision, actually. Nick Webb went on to win that. So it's lost to guys like Mark Bennett. Mark Bennett is the guy doing a good Homer Simpson impression against Alan Babich. Lost to Nick Webb twice, actually. David Abraham, you know, guys like that. So he's not really... I think that Kamil Sakalowski fight really... I think that put the brakes on David Adelaide. I think they were thinking, okay, we're onto something, we can move him forward, we can get going, we can do this. But I think, to be honest with you, that Kamil, because I thought he lost that fight. And I think they put the brakes on him after that. They kind of thought, okay, we need to take a rain check with this kid. Yes, he's good, he looks the part, he's decent, but we can't go past this level. Because in many ways, I felt he lost that fight, and you could say really at that stage it was too soon. Also, guys, on the undercard, again, there's only one 12-rounder other than the main event, which is, of course, Lowe versus Ball. There's a guy called Rustin Barney Smith. 18 years old. When did he fight? Last? Fought actually on the most recent Queensbury show, so he's way down the card. Kirk Walker, I should say, 1-0. Both these guys, I mean, it's not a really... as we expected. I mean, we all expected it wasn't going to be a stacked undercard, but realistically, when Isaac Lowe was the co-main against Nick Ball, says all that needs to be said, really. Obviously, they've got Tommy Fury against Daniel Baswanki, probably butchering that name, absolutely. Coming off the back of a loss, who is he beating? Absolutely nobody. But he's only got one loss on his record, and that was a stoppage loss in March last year. I think that might have been. No, it wasn't. I thought I recognised that fighter, but it's a different fighter. In a fight that he was losing anyway to a guy who was 20-4, who's now actually 20-5, was recently stopped by Carl Walter. That's the guy's name. So Tommy Fury, after the Jake Paul fight didn't come to fruition, I was kind of wondering what they do with him. And obviously, to be honest, it makes sense in a way to have him on his brother's undercard. You know, it does. And at the end of the day, Tommy Fury does bring eyes to it. He brings his own fans. Obviously, he is the brother of Tyson Fury, but he mainly got his claim to fame from being on Love Island. That's where he was able to gain a substantial following. And realistically, that's kind of where... That's really kind of where his fan base would come from. And believe me, they follow him. They do a lot. He does great numbers. He's got a couple of million followers on Instagram, as far as I believe. Speaking of Instagram, have a look there on screen. I've started using it again. I kind of have peaks. I got on and off with it, but I'm using it now. So if anyone wants to, link is in the comment section. I think it's @BoxingGman 19993 or something like that. Give it a follow. We'll get some traction on it. People are always telling me to just actually put it in the link, and I always forget to. But only I mentioned it there, I said I better actually do it. So Tommy Fury will bring his own fan base. So that's really the undercard itself. Yeah, look, it's nothing special. It's nothing to write home about. We all knew. I think we all knew that this was going to be a real case of a weak, dull undercard culminating in a big event. I think that's what we all know, and I think that's how it's going to be watching it. We're really going to be like, I'm going to do a watch along for it, and I really do. I'm 100% sure it's really going to be kind of me more so talking to the subs, you know, having back and forth with the subs, having a few chats in the chat, more so than actually really focusing in and you know, zoning in on the box. And I will obviously watch it, but the main event is really going to be where everything comes to fruition. So it is dearer. It is $24.95. It is a very weak undercard, but the event itself, I mean, Frank Warren is saying they're getting 94,000, which, as far as I'm aware, unless I'm very much mistaken, would beat the previous record, which was held by Anthony Joshua. So Fury and Whyte making moves. Well, Fury and Warren, if Whyte's not really, Whyte's still keeping that well and truly shut. Other news in regards Fury and Whyte, obviously I'm keeping up on that. I've been eating for the last 2 months off that, really. It's been helping a lot on the channel, but it's helped a lot of people out as well. It's the biggest. You stick with the news. That's a little advice for any up and coming YouTuber. Follow the news, and also cover other things, but follow the news. In terms of the officiators, well, Mark Lyson's going to be refereeing the fight. They didn't want any, as Fury requested, they didn't want any UK judges after the debacle with Cattrall and Taylor. Guido Cavalieri, I think Guido Cavalieri hasn't he. I know who Guido Cavalieri is. He's not a bad judge. Robert Teppa. Again, probably have to. Some judges I just know, and I can't say I really recognise the guy. I honestly, I can't say that it rings that much of a bell. But I can go on BoxRec. Let's have a look at that. BoxRec opened here. What kind of... He refereed the Felix Cash fight that just went, that he won. Very close fight. He actually refereed... Oh, interesting. He refereed the first Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury fight. And actually, he's only refereed a few fights since. So he scored that fight. He was the judge who gave the fight to Tyson Fury. Interesting. So Robert Tapper was the only judge, because Phil Edwards scored a draw. Alejandro Rachin scored it widely to Wilder. Bizarre. That was a head scratcher. And this guy who's judging Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte was the only judge who scored the fight Tyson Fury. Amongst other fights he scored Usyk Briedis. Obviously scored it correctly to Alexander Usyk. Interesting. That's one of the reasons probably why I don't recognise him, is that he's not like judges like I'm trying to think of names now, I'm forgetting some, but I say like Adelaide Bird. I know she's kind of infamous, but people like that who you've heard them so often. Steve Weisfeld, people like that, and the last one, Juan Carlos Paeo. Let's see who he refereed. I was going to say more active referee, but actually not really. He scored the Jose Ramirez versus Maurice Hooker fight. Obviously that ended in a KO, but he had Hooker. Well, he had Ramirez ahead correctly. He should have. Ramirez was definitely winning that fight. I'm looking for more big fights in terms of some of these, just to kind of get an idea. A lot of these are ending early. I'm just trying to see. He scored Myris Briedis versus Mike Perez. He had the widest scorecard. Anyone who watched that fight will know it was actually quite a close fight. The holding Briedis did in that fight was disgraceful. Scored Deontay Wilder versus Washington. He had that a draw. Okay, questionable. In terms of everything else after that, scored Nakatani versus Laborio Solis. You couldn't really have that any other way than Nakatani winning, to be fair. Again, so he scored actually a good few Deontay Wilder fights. Funny enough, he had the closest scorecard against Molina. I'm going way back now, but this is the guy this is the other judge who's going to be judging that fight. So no UK officials. Guido Cavalieri, I know. Robert Tapper. Yeah, he's a very sporadic judge, but should be okay. So you're talking about Italian, Canadian, and Mexican. Not even an American judge. It's interesting. So that's pretty much that with the Whyte Fury situation. Lee Selby announced his retirement from boxing just there on Monday. I did see that after his loss. I really did. I thought now Lee Selby looked poor, very poor in that fight, extremely poor. But I did think maybe he'd stay and have one more just fight to go out with a win. But obviously he feels that the punch resistance is going. And Lee Selby was always known for having a decent chin. He was. He was only ever dropped, I think, once in his career. Now I know he was hurt by Warrington a few times in their fight, but he never touched down. But I think Lee Selby at this stage, his punch resistance is gone. And to be honest with you, he's not looked the same since the Lee Selby, or since the Josh Warrington loss. I know he got some wins over guys like Ricky Burns. Didn't he beat Anthony? Did he fight Anthony Crolla? No, that was Ricky Burns he fought. He didn't fight Anthony Crolla. But he's got wins like that, but he's not looked the same. I thought he was handily beaten by Kambosos. He was dominating in this fight for the most part. And Lee Selby did it the hard way. You look at this British Commonwealth European IBF champion. He did it the hard way. He started on small hall shows, took an L on one of them small hall shows in a 4-rounder. I think that was on the undercard of Chris Edwards versus Uzi Ahmed, the Prince Nassim wannabe. So he did it the hard way. He got to world title level, won a world title. Was not a promoter's dream. It has been. Lee Selby didn't really have that engaging personality. He wasn't a bad person, don't get me wrong. Certainly not. Seems like a very nice man. Actually, seems like a gentleman. Seems like a good guy. But he never had that that personality where you see someone on camera and you're just taken in. His charisma. He could be recording on his iPhone, but you still watch. There you go. I'm only joking there, but you know what I mean. He never had that. He was never a ticket seller, and that's hard when you're not that and you're trying to forge a path. So he was world champion and he was still fighting low down the card, which is not good. But he has made some good money. I know that. He's comfy. I believe the fight he had on PBC, he made a nice sum of money for that. Actually, more than most fighters would have made. Because when PBC were overpaying their fighters spectacularly. So kudos to Lee Selby, 35 years old. He can enjoy his family life. He's got a couple of kids and a wife, and job well done to Lee Selby. I did think he'd stick around for one more fight to go out with a win, but obviously he feels that what's the point, enough is enough. So respect his decision. Cuba, interesting, are reportedly set to officially announce the return of professional boxing for the first time in 60 years, to claim their elite amateurs can make their pro debuts as of May. Now, I was watching Hatman's video on this. Now, I was under the impression that these were able to just turn pro and leave. Apparently, that's kind of still a bit of a grey area if they can actually leave Cuba to go to America. Just think, if they could, some of these names. Andy Cruz, Keyshawn Davis in the pros. People. Andy Cruz, if you've never seen him, type him in on YouTube. Absolutely just like your jaw drops watching him. And he's one of these guys, people, they say, like, you can make something. He makes it look easy. He is fantastic. Absolutely. And him and Keyshawn Davis, he'd beaten Keyshawn Davis. And this shows how mentally strong Keyshawn Davis is. He'd beaten Keyshawn Davis every time they'd fought, I think, going into the Olympics. And he beat him in the Olympics, but it was a very competitive fight. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. And for Keyshawn Davis to go in there with a guy who's beaten him every time they fought, and albeit, yes, he lost again. But to be able to really not let that hold him back and really go in there and try. And it was a close fight, don't get me wrong. It was a good fight. Andy Cruz. I wonder, is Savon a bit too late in the toot? Erislandy Savon. How old is Erislandy Savon? How old is he? Because he would be he's 31 years old, going on 31 this year. You do wonder though when you see that. And Errol DeSavan, that's not the youngest looking 31-year-old I've ever seen. But Savon would be a good addition to the cruiserweight division. I know Lawrence Okoli would he'd leave that cruiserweight division instantly, because Savon beat him a couple of times in the amateurs. Actually knocked him out in the first round in one of their fights. So Erislandi Savon, so many good Cuban amateurs out there. Like, I'd love it if they would be able to just freely go to the States, sign with some of these promoters, because I mean, just some of them are fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Other news. Kelly Sauerland has declared that a weight has now been agreed for a fight between Eubank and Kell Brook. Interesting. So I think Kell Brook, or was it Kell Brook or was it Eubank? It was Eubank, I think, who said that 157, was it? He said it was 157 or 158 would be the minimum. That's the minimum he'd go down. I personally would like to see Kell Brook call it a day. If he still feels he has something left, I mean, I know we said the money is right, and how much would he want? Would he want crazy amount of money, or does he think that Eubank he's seeing enough holes in Eubank Jr.? At the end of the day, we talk, Eubank Jr. is in his 30s now. He's going on, what, 32, 33? Older? No, he's about 32. So maybe he's thinking Eubank's athleticism, which was so prevalent back in the day, maybe it's not what it was, and Kell Brook can still outbox him, can set up the jab, potentially. I'd be picking Eubank Jr. in that fight, truth be told. In other news, Ryan Garcia, Eddie Hearn has revealed he's spoken to Golden Boy about potentially him versus Maxie Hughes next summer. Ryan Garcia's got to get through his next fight this weekend, and we'll see how that goes. I don't know. Ryan Garcia lately he's been out of the ring for over a year. The way he's been talking, I don't know. I'm not expecting to lose per se, but I'm expecting to look very shaky in this fight. Very shaky. I'm not saying he's going to lose, though. I don't think he's going to lose. I think he's going to win by knockout, but I would with counter left hook as well. But I think he'll have some shaky moments in there, definitely. There is still some talk between Joseph Parker and Joe Joyce in negotiation, with good progress being made towards a potential deal. Sam Jones has actually come out and said, and that's interesting, because I wouldn't at all be shocked if the WBO, which they're both highly ranked with, I think Joyce is mandatory, if Usyk AJ happens next, if they're looking to do undisputed, provided say Usyk wins, Fury wins, I can envision a scenario where they'll probably just order Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker for the interim title. That would not surprise me in the least. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. In terms of the fight, on one hand, I think Joe Joyce could outwork Joseph Parker. At the same time, Joe Joyce is so slow and cumbersome. I think that Joseph Parker, with a bit more aggression, letting them fast hands go, I think we'd really see Parker's hand speed against someone like Joe Joyce be very prevalent. I think he'd be able to, if he could come over the top of that jab and really let the right hands and let the hooks go on the inside, I think that hand speed would be absolutely blistering against someone like Joe Joyce. Yeah, he'd make it, well, it is very quick for a heavyweight, but I think against someone like Joe Joyce, we'd really see him. So I can see that going two ways, because it's been a very good fight. Obviously, Triple G is fighting Murata this weekend, but Canelo's trainer Eddie Reynoso has said that if Canelo beats Bivol and Triple G loses, so if he loses, they will look to just do they'll look to do undisputed in September instead. So obviously, if he wins, he'll have WBA. The winner of Joe Smith versus Beterbiev will have WBA, WBO, and IBF, and Canelo will just look to do undisputed. Imagine that, people. Imagine picking. Well, I suppose it is easier considering one guy has 3 titles. It's not like that he went from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, but nevertheless, still back-to-back undisputeds. I mean, Jesus, people, in weight divisions, the space of a year each time, that's impressive, man. That's impressive. And light heavyweight, I mean, that's, again, like, you got to give Canelo props. Like, whether you love him or hate him, you can't, like, I heard Hatman say this, and he's right, he's spot on. He'd get more credit for beating CARLA. He would. He'd get more credit. Bivol is unknown. Like, no one knows who the hell he is, apart from the hardcores. So people will be like, oh, he beat this Bivol guy, and the way some people are when they see highlights, and it's not jaw-dropping with, big knockouts every 2 seconds. You look at, this is not to say Triple G's not a good fighter, he is, but you look at Triple G, and it's like, wow, look at this. blowing people out of there. You know, you look at Charlo and especially 154. Look at this guy and he's got the fans. Whereas you look at Bivol, yeah, he's got some good knockouts, but he's more a boxer. So people be like, he doesn't look that. And this is the guy Canelo beat. I'm not surprised. They're not really looking at the skill that's on offer, if you know what I mean, with Bivol. And he's not as known. He's not a big name. So I get it. I get like Canelo deserves credit. He really does, because he'll gain WBA title. But in terms of just the general fans, the people who don't know or not in the known, they'll probably just kind of look and think, oh, who did he beat? I beat that guy. Oh yeah, that guy didn't look too good anyway. Instead of saying, geez, he's beating a guy who I think is going to give Canelo a very, very hard time. Oh, I think this is a very tough fight. It's going to be, believe me, this is going to be a tough fight for Canelo. Make no mistake. Have no doubt it's going to be a tough fight. Have no doubt. Errol Spence has been talking with Kate Abdul about his car crash. He actually states that he had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, after his car crash. When I was driving, I'd have like flashes of the car running into me, or at a red light, I just have a flash of a car hitting me. PTSD is definitely real. I still have I still have it sometimes when I'm driving. I can imagine. I mean, Errol Spence was talking about he has no regrets pulling out the Pacquiao fight, because that could have been the end of his career, and it could have. I mean, the eye injury is a serious injury, and you'll never fully shake the eye injury, I don't think. And I wouldn't be at all shocked, and I think if Yordenis Ugas want to take a page out of Lennox Lewis's book, I think it was against Gary Mason, where Mason had an eye injury, might have even been a detached retina as well. They targeted the eye. They even put it was like white tape over where the injury was, so Lewis was targeting that in sparring with his sparring partners, and that's how he was able to, well, apart from the fact he was just better, but he was able to target that straight away. Spence is always going to have that target now. Whether he wins, people will look at Spence and think he's damaged goods. Between the eye injury, the PTSD, you cannot tell me that you can have a crash that violent and not have residual damage in the shape of mental and physical. I mean, people, if you look at that mugshot, because he had to take a mugshot because he was drink driving, you look at the eye, and I think it's the eye that's in question, it does not look normal. In that pic, it does not look normal. Hence the reason I wasn't at all surprised when they announced that Errol Spence was having eye issues, because that eye didn't look normal at all in that crash, in that mugshot. Did not look right at all. So I wasn't surprised at all. Errol Spence pre-car crash, I don't think we're ever going to get that. I mean, that was a violent, traumatic... Mentally, it's a bridge to get over. Because something like that will stick with you mentally. I mean, the fact that you were thrown at high speed from a Ferrari, that is just, you're not going to get over that mentally anytime soon. It's always going to be there. And physically, I mean, Jesus Christ, God knows what it's done to him. You know, we know that this happened, but how do we know there's not other things that were kept secret? That it was like, well, Jesus, he has this wrong, don't let the people know. And that does happen with people, not even like athletes. I mean, it happens all around the world. You'll see people where it'd be like, keep that on the DL. Oh, this is what's wrong with him, but also who's got this. Keep that on the DL. They don't need to know that. Keep that on the DL. So I'd be amazed if something like that hasn't happened. Again, if you see the crash, I mean, Jesus Christ, people, I've seen less, and they've been worse. And, you know, I'll never believe that Errol Spence was just, you know, a few broken teeth, a few battered, you know, bruises. I believe it's way worse than that. You know, thankfully he was able to come back, but, you know, I worry that the Spence who fought Porter, I think that might be peak Spence. I don't think we'll ever see that again. And I like Errol Spence. I've always liked watching Errol Spence. I think Errol Spence is brilliant to watch. That's why I'm going to stay up and do a watch along for his fight, because I love watching him. It was sad seeing him go down that road prior to the crash of getting drunk and, you know, blowing up in weight. You know, I admired Errol Spence coming up as just a nitty gritty fighter who just, he was winning well, and he was doing it the right way. And then when he won that title, you could see the small signs after he beat Kell Brook, that was how he was going. The fact he went down that road, it's sad. And, you know, as I say, like, obviously it took something like a massive car crash to kind of snap him out of it, but it's not good. It shouldn't be that snaps you out of it. But people, I think we are good to go. I've gone for about 20 minutes, so I'm going to leave you there. Hope you did what I asked to start, put on that kettle. Hope you had a nice cup of tea or a cup of coffee, depending on where you are in the world, or depending on whatever you prefer. Lads and lassies, I'll leave you with there. Smash the like button if you can. Less than 30 subs off 7k. Please. hit that subscribe. I'd love to do it by the end of this week. Love to. There's boxing on this weekend, isn't there? Isn't there? God almighty, isn't there? Oh, there is, yeah, because we're either watching on for Triple G. Hopefully we'll get it there. People, I'll leave you with that.